podcast from Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. The China Expert Series is here to educate and celebrate mistakes made by foreign investors whilst doing business in China. It includes personal stories from the China experts on the challenges they've experienced in the market, how they've overcome them, and what pieces of advice they can share with those of you who are just starting out. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia, and I'm a Hong Kong-born European with over 20 years experience in helping foreign investors enter the China and Hong Kong market. My mission is to help foreign investors, leaders, entrepreneurs avoid the most common obstacles that they encounter along their China business journey for them to accelerate their profitability. I hope you enjoy the episode. Today, I am thrilled to have Daniel Bateman on. Daniel has been a follower of mine in the Thrive in China community. He's joined a lot of my roundtables, and just a few weeks ago, I did his podcast, and now today it's time for him to join the Thrive in China podcast. So, Daniel, welcome to the podcast. As I always say, I think the best person to introduce themselves is the person themselves. So why don't you just give the listeners a bit about your background, where are you from, who do you work for, and really the first question always is, how did you end up in China, right?
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm delighted to be here. Been a big follower for a few years now, and got a lot to share today. I'm going to be really digging into the whole China journey. And my China journey really began, I was at University of Southampton. I was studying law, very disillusioned, didn't want to be a lawyer, didn't want to be a judge. I noticed when I go into lectures and people would say, oh, what did this judge say about this case? And I was just so interested in business. I was not interested at all in being a lawyer. And I made some Chinese friends in the first semester. And I was telling them, oh, I'm interested in Hong Kong and China, and I've always been interested in Bruce Lee and Chinese history. And they said, well, if you like China so much, why don't you go to China? I thought, oh, wow, that's a brilliant idea. So my law program at the University of Southampton had an exchange year with Hong Kong U.
Okay.
So 2011, I was in Hong Kong, never traveled by myself before, arrived in Hong Kong. There was a student helper there, I remember that, but imagine arriving in a city. I'd never really been to London that often. So arriving in Hong Kong, just being wowed by the whole
glamour and glitz.
The glamour, the spectre of the buildings.
Yeah.
Because I originally grew up in Bedfordshire, leafy Bedfordshire, which is about 1 hour north of London. Very boring, rural, idyllic, but not great for opportunity. Yeah, you get a lot of London commuters that live in my area and then commute into London. But you come to Asia and you thought, wow, this is incredible. So that was my gateway into China. And even nowadays, Hong Kong is always a great gateway into mainland, I would say. Sometimes if you don't want to go straight into the rough and tough of mainland China, Hong Kong is a good starting point and then branch out from there. During that year in Hong Kong, I went traveling around mainland China. I made some quite affluent and wealthy friends in China, and they introduced me to Guangzhou and Chengdu and Hangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing. And I just thought, wow, I've got to come back here, learn the language. I guess that's the one tip I'd say today, or just know a little bit of the language.
Sure.
So
what did you learn? Did you learn Cantonese when you weren't for the year in Hong Kong, or was it more in the direction of Mandarin?
It was more Mandarin. However, knowing a little bit of Cantonese does help. I find China and Hong Kong, especially mainland China, it's one of those Asian countries where you speak a little bit of their language. They are the most appreciative people in the world.
Yeah,
you could say ni hao and then they go crazy.
Yeah.
So and it's easier to learn Mandarin than Cantonese, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you speak Cantonese?
No, I know how to swear in Cantonese, but I don't know how to speak it.
So
at school in Hong Kong, they teach you the swear words.
Yeah, which can be useful. depending on the situation. But yeah, I was just wowed by the whole country. And then when everybody on my law course was, oh, I'm going to be a judge, I'm going to be a lawyer, I said, well, I'm off to China. So I got one of these Chinese government scholarships, which are quite, I wouldn't say easy to get, but certainly quite manageable to get. You know, if you know, I mean,
I didn't know that existed even. So how do you know if that something like that exists?
So this is an interesting story. I called up the China Education Office in London and said, look, I'm interested in studying in China. Could you point me in the right directions for scholarships? And I just built a bit of rapport on the phone with the main minister,
Yeah.
main guy in charge. And he said, you're the first guy to call me and not scream at me, where's my scholarship today? So I think on that basis, he just gave me a scholarship. So I ended up in
But could
2013.
you choose the university or they kind of dictate where you go?
There was an element of that because the guy asked me, I'm still friends with him this day. He's actually in Shanghai. So they gave me a choice and they said, okay, Shanghai, Tianjin or Beijing. And there was a few other cities that I'd never heard of, but now they're very common, like Wuhan and all these kind of places. But back then, everybody was going to Shanghai and Beijing. If you were a foreigner, those were the two, 2013, 2014. And I wanted to go somewhere a little bit different. And actually, I ended up going to Tianjin. He recommended for me to go to Tianjin, which was great. There was not many foreigners even back then. So to be immersed in that language and culture, it would have been great to go to Beijing or Shanghai where I am now. But I think for the language and studying language, you had to go out and speak Chinese. You couldn't just in Shanghai, you can get away with it, but you couldn't there. You had to just throw yourself in at the deep end.
Throw yourself in,
Yeah. So after that, the British Council had a internship program with a company called CRTC Asia, who are now called virtual internships.
Okay.
Guy called Ed Holyrood Pierce. He's quite well known in the China circles, British guy. And I did an internship in southern China, in Guangzhou. Sorry, not in Guangzhou, in Shenzhen, with a Spanish company actually that was importing coffee beans into Hong Kong, then into China. And I managed to broker some deals for them as an intern.
Sure.
So again, 10 years ago, doing an internship was completely different to now. So now I find that with a lot of interns, you have to kind of hold the hand. Back then, the client said, look, go and find me clients. So I mean,
you say that, Daniel, but I had interns back in 2010, 9, 10, 11, 12, where I had to do a lot of hand holding. I think a lot depends also on the character of the individual, their motivation level, and what they want to do. I would have loved to have thrown them in and been like, give me clients. But a lot didn't even know how to answer phones or talk to people properly on the phone. So it was starting at that point. And I'm talking about Westerners, not Chinese, right? So I think that really depends on the characters you find for your internships. But I do agree with you that with a lot of people that I've hired, they always tell me when they, a lot of the time they exit our company because they're going to leave China. They always tell me that they would never have had such a work experience like this in Europe. They would never have been given the levels of responsibility or been thrown into the company as they would have had they gone to an internship or a job in Europe. I think that's just kind of the cult. I don't know, culture maybe not. It's just sort of what we do as Western firms. We're thrown into this world and you just have to survive, right?
Yeah. It's great feedback because I was always the first one to arrive and last one to leave. I remember that during my internship, and it's a good life lesson to always
completely
above and beyond. And
absolutely,
obviously not every day, but certainly I made that impression.
Absolutely.
You've got to go above and beyond because I remember there was some Brits in particular on that internship that would just go out and party all the time.
Yeah.
And some of them didn't even end up going to their to their offices. So I had the foresight that they might offer me a job after this, and
Exactly.
which they did,
Yeah.
So they offered me a job, but actually I had a place at Fudan University, which is I considered, I guess, the Cambridge, I would
Yes.
say,
Yeah.
Cambridge
Cambridge,
of
Oxford.
China.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've obviously got
Is
Tsinghua.
Shanghai Cambridge and Beijing is Oxford? Is that how we're
Yeah,
determining that? Okay.
kind of. And then I mean in Shanghai you've got Shanghai Jiaotong and
Yeah.
Fudan, which are
Yeah.
kind of competing.
Yeah.
Shanghai Jiaotong, I would say, is better location. It's more central Shanghai,
Yeah.
but actually Fudan is right up in
It's
the
well
northeast.
known. Yeah, it's the top rank.
Yeah. So it was definitely an experience, and so I ended up doing my master's, and then I wanted to work in an organization that built the bridge between UK and China, and this is how I've always positioned myself. I am the Brit that
Mm.
you can rely on, trusted businessman here in China that understands both cultures, speaks
Mm.
both languages, and you can do business with me. That's how I've always kind of positioned myself. 2016, I moved back to the UK. I was living in my hometown with my mother. And so I've just come from Shanghai and
Culture
China,
shock.
3 or 4. And then I've moved to like leafy Bedfordshire, a village of 2,000 people. All my friends have moved out. I'm commuting into London every day, and you know how awful that
Yeah.
is. Everybody's face is down here, and there's
Yeah.
no, their hairlines are here. And but I just hustled and hustled in a good way, because there's a China office that is part of the Foreign Commonwealth Office that essentially lobbies the government here. So what
Mm.
they do is they work with more liberal, open organizations here in China, places like Yunnan, and they did some programs in Beijing as well, and try and work with different legal organizations to create better conditions in China. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a organization called the China Britain, the Great Britain China Center.
Okay.
Okay, so they're in Hyde Park Corner. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little office of 10 people, and that gave me a lot of exposure. The issue was it was in London and I wanted to be in China. So,
Right.
and I sat down with my boss one day and I said, look, where is this going essentially? And he said, well, if you work hard for 30 years, you might be the ambassador to China for the
In,
UK. So I was like, well, 30 years, you know, it's a long way away. So I left that position and moved back to Shanghai, January 2018. And I've been here ever since, working in
a
different
variety.
organizations all over, and then officially took the entrepreneurial plunge last summer.
Okay. And what are you doing today?
So I have my own company called BritBridge, which, as the name suggests, acts as a bridge between UK and
Mm-hmm.
China with business. So that's one of my businesses, kind of digital marketing agency. My biggest client is Regroup China. Regroup China, they manage 50 different brands from B2C to B2B,
Mm-hmm.
B2G. They're one of the first digital marketing agencies in China, so 13 years old. And they work schools, universities, brands. They're known as a bit of a James Bond company because they work with a lot of the brands are in the if you watch the Daniel Craig, well, from Sean Connery to Daniel Craig, they work with John Smedley, they work with Turnbull Asser, they work with a lot of watch brands. So essentially what I do here in China is open them up digitally and offline,
Mm-hmm.
growing these different brands. I'm also I use an inverted commas KOL influencer, whatever that means nowadays. So I have a social media presence on Little Red, WeChat, and Douyin. So comprised of 300,000 fans. And again, I've created a kind of British character somewhere
Mm-hmm.
between James Bond and Mr. Bean, that promotes brands. Myself, UK, creates a profile. And recently, as you mentioned, I've launched this podcast, Panda Profits podcast. They've got a little plug, and really focus on helping brands, very similar to you. Promoting brands and insight. More, I guess, anecdotally. You go into like really you go into the regulations and really, you
Yeah.
really do research. I just plug in and play a, hey, how you doing? And turn up and we'll have a chat. But yeah, it's great fun. And yeah, I do a lot of speeches, hosting here in China. I really get myself out there, go to all these offline events,
Mm.
and yeah, really enjoy my time here and working with different brands and companies.
And what have you felt now becoming an entrepreneur has been um, kind of the challenges that you focus on? I mean, you started really, I don't know, I have no idea to call it a good time, bad time, but it's when suddenly the borders opened, right? Let's just say we all survived COVID, but you were there for the Shanghai lockdowns. You were on the ground physically seeing everything. And then suddenly making that plunge into entrepreneurship right after is very brave, in my opinion. What
Mm.
what I don't know, what opportunity did you see? What was your green light to take that plunge?
Mm. Well, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Unfortunately for me, I never had that great boss.
Hmm.
So I always tell the story about, have you seen the movie Horrible Bosses?
Yes.
Or Jennifer Aniston and
Yeah,
Colin
yeah,
Farrell and Kevin Spacey, who
yeah.
we won't. But I had bosses of similar personalities. I didn't have the Jennifer Aniston boss, unfortunately. I always had male bosses.
Unfortunately.
But I never had that boss that or that team that were really nurturing and really let's make something special. There
Hmm.
was so much politics and unfortunately not delivering. That was always a big thing for the every company that I ever worked for. There'd be a promise here, but actually they'd under deliver.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I can mention names, but certain organizations that I worked for here in China, their job is to be a bridge between Western companies and China, and they
Hmm.
weren't quite fulfilling that function.
Hmm.
So I identified very early on that I didn't want to work for anyone ever again, unless you got clients. Like clients are mini bosses anyway, right? You
Yeah,
still have to,
yeah.
So there's that element, but also I wanted to bridge that gap and really deliver for companies,
Hmm.
actually have conversion and impact, which
Right.
I think gets lost in a lot of the narrative with some of these NGOs and organizations. Um, and that's where I think it would have been more of a risk for me to stay in employment, stay in a company. I see it that way because I would have been miserable. I wouldn't have
Sure,
been doing
sure,
exactly what I wanted to do.
sure. And and what have been the sort of challenges that have popped up in the last, I don't know, 10, 12 months of being on your own?
Hmm. Um,
I mean,
manage.
you are actually in the phase, and I didn't really realize this, you are actually in the phase of a lot of my existing clients that have incorporated during COVID or are in the process of incorporating themselves and are startups. Now, in my opinion, you can have a history of 100 years in your home jurisdiction. I don't care. But once you're in China, everybody starts up in the same boat, right? You all have this very similar journeys, very similar challenges. But I always think it comes to mindset and character, how you get out of those, right?
Hmm.
So that's why I'm asking, like, what are kind of the challenges that you've experienced as now a decision maker for your own business?
Well, in the beginning, there was an element of loneliness because I was by myself, right? I'm used
Yeah,
to being in an office with people,
yeah,
so no, having ideas to bounce
yeah.
off, when you first start was an issue. Um, but obviously you get over that the first
Mm,
few weeks. Knowing how much time to work as well, because when you're in employment, right, 9 to 6 here in China, right, you turn up at 9, you turn up at 6, but you actually end up finding that when you have your own business, you end up working longer. So
mm,
I typically work 7 days a week because
mm,
of the nature of the business that I do.
mm,
Now, I'm not complaining when I say because I actually really enjoy it, but that was somewhat of a challenge that you actually end up working
mm.
more, um,
Did you
more.
feel like you were working more even under the other organizations?
Well, the other organizations, so the first company I worked for in China was a blockchain company, right? Or need I say more? And I vividly remember the first day. In the UK, it's quite common to have this culture, but this was a Chinese company in China. It was a 9 to 6 contract, so 6:05, I left, and the next day I came in. The boss said, "Yeah, don't do that again."
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. You stay until the last man's here, right? And I wanted to make sure that I didn't have that kind of mindset going into my business, but certainly I saw, I'm someone that applauds being on time or being early for something. This is what I always drum into my team right now is be 5 minutes early. So that was rather than on time for something. So that was quite a shock. But the other organizations I worked for, I always worked longer. And that was another reason why I decided, well, I'm just going to do my own business because I'm not getting the appreciation that, I'm one of the last guys in the office, and not to show face, but because I'm going above and beyond and really trying to deliver.
Yeah.
So that was something that I wanted to apply to my business, that I'm going to put in lots of time and effort, but I'm also going to have that enjoyment time. So that was a benefit, the flexibility. If I do want to go to the gym at 10 in the morning, I can technically. But managing the time was quite key. I think if I'd stayed in those organizations, in particular, the last couple of years, I was working for NGOs that, I was working for a chamber, I was working for a business council, and both of them, they're quite toxic environments to be in because you can't really grow in those organizations. There's not really a lot of scope to be entrepreneurial. It's very set, and there's some good people, but there's also a lot of bad people in those organizations. And I think there's, I remember one of the bosses of one of the organizations I worked for, the first one, he's quite a well-known German in China. You may know him. And he said to us, "I know you guys are not here to build a career. I know you're coming, but treat this as an education." And that really sort of resonated with me. So it's not a long-term career.
Right.
And when I created my business, I wanted to create something that was long-term sustainable.
Sure.
Yeah, so that really hit home for me. And I wanted to stay in China. That was quite
do you
specific.
feel like one of the challenges that companies, small startups have is not developing a hierarchical system where you have room to grow? I mean, that's also, it's interesting you say this because this has also been one of my objectives in my 20-odd year career with China. We started off really not having any hierarchy. It was like, here's the accounting department, here's the tax department, here's the payroll department. I've got one person managing all these departments and they report to me, right? But to be honest with you, even when I started, actually everyone reported to me. I didn't even have somebody between me and them. Do you feel like this is in order to have retainment of staff, or you need to have some vision of where you're going, right? So do you feel this is something that's missing with a lot of companies that are coming in, that are starting up, that they don't have this hierarchical idea yet?
I do agree with that. And I think the departments are not working symbiotically. So I'll give you a really great example. Regroup, my client, they have another business here called Regroup China. And the team that they work with, they've got about a 50-man team in Guangzhou. They've been working together for 6 years. Now, in the UK, to have a partner for 6 years would be a long time. In China, it's unheard of.
Yeah.
And the reason why it works is because they're all in communication themselves, but the managers really delegate tasks really well. They know, HR, but they don't split them up. So your HR, your accounting, everyone works symbiotically and everyone is behind the business. So it could be a situation of, okay, we've got this client, we need to share their content and grow their presence here in China. The people in HR know exactly what's happening with the project as well. They know that, they're building a WeChat, or they're building a Little Red, and everyone shares the content. to everyone behind the business.
So I completely agree with you, and this is why a lot of my philosophies and mottos and spiels during my roundtables and all of that is about transparency and clarity. I think the problem is that foreign investors come into China and they're like, can't reveal too much because someone's going to steal our idea, or somebody's going to, I don't know, there's this whole cheating mentality. They think they're going to get cheated. They come to China and they're like, we're going to get cheated. We're going to get stolen ideas, or, you know, products will be copied, or they come already with this negative mindset, right? What you just explained in this company is rare, right? You don't have this transparency and clarity between all departments, because it's like finance can't reveal the numbers to sales. I'm like, of course they have to reveal the numbers. How do you know they get the KPIs? Of course, HR has to know what projects are happening. They have to know if more manpower is needed or not, right? You're absolutely right in that it's a symbiotic relationship. You have to reveal information about what your vision and plan is. Otherwise, what do you expect? You're going to hit roadblocks, right? If people don't know what's happening in the business or what you want to happen. But I think there's always this fear of, I'm going to get cheated on, so I better hush a little bit.
Yeah. Well, my best advice for that would be, you know, and it's I don't think there's anything wrong with saying this, is don't go fully Chinese. And what I mean by that is when you're working with a partner in China, you want a team that is multicultural, international.
Well, this is the bridge we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're a foreign invested company. We are a bridge. I mean, we're promoting, I don't know, German-made products, British-made products, American-made products to Chinese.
Yeah. I was speaking to a British company yesterday, actually, who they make sleeping products, sleeps, you know, pillows and things. And they just went fully Chinese. They just went with an agent, did no due diligence, and got burnt. And you know, they were considering some other options, but they just went straight for cheap. And if they'd actually probably done a bit of due diligence and realized that sometimes you do need to pay a little bit more to have quality, right? But one of the reasons I work with Regroup China is because they're nice people. And the Chinese team that I work with in Guangzhou are very open-minded. They're never secretive. I ask them a question, they get back to me straight away, you know. And it's a really great relationship to have, you know, having that team that you can just rely on. I think you have to open yourself up a little bit when you come to China. It's, you know, look at it this way. If the Chinese were coming to Europe or coming to the UK, they would also have to do the same. They would have to open up a little bit. So I think it's important to have really, really good partners on the ground. And even if you're not in China, having partners that have really had the experience. You know, an example would be you, Chris.
I mean, I think what I always relate to is what I hope people can find relatable is, what's the added value? There's cheap, but then do they help? Right?
Yeah.
Again, is there transparency and clarity if they're cheap? I don't know. That's not for me to judge. I know through my experience that has never worked out. And I think there's a certain point when you start up and when you start growing and scaling that you want somebody to bring added value. Daniel, you said it perfectly. I'm an entrepreneur. There are moments of loneliness where you just don't have anybody to brainstorm with, right? The goal is to be able to brainstorm with your partners at a minimum, right? So if I am a brand coming into China, at a minimum, I want somebody who can bring added value, where I say, you know, I just saw another brand do this. What do you think? Can you let's now debate on this? You know, I like playing devil's advocate. The whole point of growing the business is playing devil's advocate, debating on different strategies and what might work for you and what works for somebody else, but maybe not for you. Starting up in China as a foreign invested company can be lonely, extremely lonely. And working with a cheap firm that can't communicate with you or doesn't have the same vision as you, where actually you don't even want to communicate with them because you don't like them. I mean, which has happened. It's even more lonely.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Um,
it's definitely it's true. But yeah, I think that kind of lasted a few weeks, but now I've got a team around me.
right.
I employ quite a few interns as well, who I'm training and
What
empowering.
are what are how do you employ interns in China? I think this is a big question that a lot of people would love to know is how do you go about the legalities of that? Are you hiring Western interns, Chinese interns?
Mm,
And what do you feel are the pros and cons of that?
mm,
I'll just share my con is that being a relatively small business, I'm not Ernst and Young, I'm not KPMG by
mm,
any shape or form. I have decided against interns. I've had the experience of it. I've decided against it just because I don't want to educate them. So, a bit of a selfish perspective.
mm, mm.
I just don't feel like I have enough time, resources to be able to educate properly for them to then get the jobs that are needed to be done in my organization to get done. So I'm really curious from your perspective, how do you employ them, but also what do you do with them? Like, what do
Yeah.
you give them?
So there is an element of hand holding, and you really have to break down, exactly what the tasks are. Sometimes there is an element of basic initiative. I always say what I say to my
Do
interns
you
is that
hire Chinese interns or Western interns or a mix?
it's so when you hire offline interns in China, you have to pay them. That's the one thing. It has to go through a lot of documentation. So I don't do that, right? What I do is I hire for a company called Virtual Internships. Now,
Okay.
that company, the interns are free.
Okay.
Okay. Now when I say free labor, it's not free labor because when I did intern, I never got paid for an internship
Hmm.
in China, apart from one because it was in an office in Shanghai.
Hmm.
But they're all remote. So
Hmm.
I've worked with interns in New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, US, UK. So that's how I deal with that. I mean, a lot of the work I do is remote anyway. It'd be great to have someone next to me and showing them
Hmm.
the ropes. The challenge with working with interns in particular is a lot of them just want that letter at the end.
Right.
So they want that. And I've had interviews with some of these interns saying, "Oh, by the way, do you offer a reference letter at the end?" You don't ask that question, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of implied. Like if you go above and beyond. I've had a mixed bag of interns. I've had some that went above and beyond and actually secured clients, and then others that were quite self-entitled. And I think it's a generational thing as well.
Hmm.
This idea that you have to work hard to get results and go above and beyond does sometimes get lost.
Hmm.
Some of them do want an easy way, but I think to really nurture a good team, you have to put in some time, some I usually have a call with them once a week or once every 2 weeks just to go through things. Do you have any questions
Yeah.
and how to live? But I think what I'm giving them, I'm imparting my education in China that they can then utilize later on. They're probably going to have it a lot worse if they go on to another company.
Sure.
So I kind of really drum it into them. I give them business acumen. I really
Hmm.
show them and how to deliver on a project. I think that's
Right.
quite a key skill to give them rather than just giving them admin tasks. I get them involved in the business development, I get them involved in the marketing, the research, the proposal. I want them involved in the whole thing because that's what I wanted when I was doing an internship. I wanted
Right.
a boss that was nurturing and gave me opportunities and gave me a pat on the back. I
And
think
where
it's
you were
quite
also busy. I mean, I think the issue is also being busy in your internship, right?
yeah.
Um,
So,
um,
but my interns right now, they don't work a 9 to 6. I get them for 3, 4 hours a day, and then
okay.
every now and again, oh, I've got an exam this week. So it does happen, So you have to time manage as well. But I think when you're a founder in the beginning, you've got an SME, you have to, you don't have £30,000 to spend on
Sure.
a business
Full-time
development
or
manager,
on a
right?
full-time staff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you have to, I wouldn't say go cheap, but you have to utilize what's
Mhm.
around you.
Have you ever hired Chinese interns?
I have, but they're Chinese interns outside of China.
I
So
see. Okay.
they're studying in the US or
Okay.
Australia, New Zealand. That's
Sure.
something I'm looking into in the next few months. In previous organizations I worked for when I didn't have my own business, I did hire interns, and I think that it was a mixed bag again.
Mhm.
Um, but I was always surprised that, I never looked at an internship as, right, this is 3 months and I'm just doing this for the experience. I had the mindset, I want to get a job here. And I
Mhm.
think that's the mindset that a lot of interns don't have. They just say, oh, I'm going to get the experience and get as much out of it as possible.
Yeah.
Where
I
actually
think
the
I think
end
the issue is that a
goal,
lot of people don't have a direction. They don't know where they want to
yeah,
live. They don't know
yeah,
where they want to be. They don't know. Um,
yeah,
there's not this sense of longevity and
yeah,
long-term vision. It's all short-term vision and what's happening in the next 6 months, right?
sure,
Um,
sure. And attention to detail is a big issue, I find.
yeah,
Reading basic instructions, and the way I frame it is, if you were doing an exam, you'd read the
yeah,
question properly, right? And say,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, and you'd prepare for it as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's you treat
yeah.
it like an
The
exam,
same thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So, have there been any other challenges you've faced now being on your own?
Yeah, I can't go into too much detail, but the podcast actually recently. So the podcast that I originally had a co-host, and um, that was challenging at times
Hmm,
because you have different visions, you have different
of
ways of
course.
doing things.
I'll be honest, that's
Sometimes,
also why I do it on my own.
so I think sometimes resentment can kick in if one person's working harder than the other person. I won't
Sure.
say who's working harder,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
um, if you did when you're going into a project, and you can see this with my LinkedIn and my
yeah,
WeChat, I am plugging the hell out of these podcasts, and I'll do the same with this one. This
yeah.
will be everywhere. And if if when you're a co-founder with someone, if you don't have that symbiotic relationship, coming back to that word,
Yeah.
it can be quite tricky. So that was challenging.
But I think I mean, I would like to relate that then to a broader scape. This happens with a lot of partnerships, right? I see this
mm,
also with my own podcast. With the Thrive in China podcast, if I have a guest speaker who comes on who doesn't assist in plugging the episode, the resonance is not there.
yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Because it's a two-way street. It's not just me interviewing you. It's we're having a conversation about our journeys and our experiences in China. You have to
mm,
work together to get this done.
yeah,
And it's the same when you work with other partners in China, just not, I mean, not just related to business partners, but you're working with, I don't know, third parties across China. The
mm,
relationship is a two-way street. If it is one-sided, it's not going to pan out,
yeah, yeah.
right?
You're absolutely right. I mean,
Um,
I've had certain guests that came on my podcast and promised they'd plug it, and then they didn't. And then there's ones that said they wouldn't plug it. Now they've seen the
yeah,
results. So
yeah,
it goes both ways. But that was, we're friends and everything. I think that's the key. I hear some, partnerships break up and then they
mm,
don't be friends. But I think that was somewhat of a challenge, is going into something with really good intentions and it not quite working out.
right.
That was, but also continuing it. So
Mm,
that I could have just stopped it there, but I thought, no, I'm going to make this happen. So that's a good lesson for businesses coming to China. Sometimes the first year or two, you might not make any money,
yeah.
but I think what will
Well,
succeed is just,
I love you saying that. So, uh, their forecasts don't say that they're not going to make money.
mm,
So, we've got brands and companies coming in that have these beautiful, beautiful budgeted forecasts of revenue that's going to be floating into the company.
mm,
And just one example is I have one client who was very, I kept telling them, be conservative, be conservative, be conservative. They're like, no, 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 this is just going to happen naturally and organically, and we forecast it, and it's just going to happen. Yeah, they're not going to hit those numbers for another 2 years.
Yeah,
So it's just, yeah,
yeah,
be
it
weary.
happens. It happens a lot, and I guess the final challenge for me was the stability. So when you have a job, you get your salary every month,
Yeah,
and it's quite constant. If you're in sales, it might be different. You might
yeah,
get ups and downs, but your business sometimes it's like
yeah.
this. It's so that was
Especially in your startup phase.
yeah. So I had to get used to that, but I always found that if you just worked through it, you got through it. That was always
Yeah, yeah,
that was the best way to kind of deal with a low month is you
yeah,
just means pinging out 10 more emails or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's just going again above and beyond what you would do.
Exactly. And I think that's can be seen with most startups in China. You know, my rule of thumb is usually a company will break even between 3 to 5 years. You will have the exceptions,
Mm,
okay? But in general, it takes 3 to 5 years to break even. And you're going to have a roller coaster journey in those 3, 5 years where 1 month is fantastic. And that 1 month can maybe cover your costs for the whole year, but the rest of the year is crap, right?
mm, yeah.
Um, and it's true. It's you hit a point in your journey where you say, this is so unstable. How are we ever going to succeed? Do we exit or do we fight through? Right? Um, and people always make the assumption that the biggest hurdle is green lighting a China project. Actually, no, the biggest hurdle is the easiest part is green lighting the project. The biggest hurdle is then after getting set up and saying, okay, let's keep going, let's keep going.
Mhm,
Um, and of course, the issue is you've got to keep plugging money into the business and have those financial resources to push forward, right?
mhm,
And obviously I'll plug this, but from the accounting perspective, if you don't budget and forecast for your business, you're not going to have any insight on how well
mhm,
you're doing or what more you need to do, right, to succeed.
mm. I remember attending one of your roundtables. I think it was in November, and you said, "Have you budgeted for next year yet?" I was like, "Oh my God, no!" So that was actually having that foresight. And a lot of companies don't do that when they come to China, as they don't
Yes.
look at the year ahead. They just think, "Oh, we see 1.4 billion people. We want to sell our products or service." And it's like, well, it doesn't quite work like that. You need to
Yeah.
have a real forecast. So that was in the beginning, that was having all your ducks in a row, whether it be
Exactly.
your financials or your legals. That was something that I had to but also knowing that you can't do this alone. Like you
Yeah.
need partners to do this, and
Yes. Yes.
that's key.
Yeah. It's a administrative homework that nobody likes doing,
Mm,
myself included. But it is so vital just to have insight into how the business is developing, right?
mm,
How it's moving forward.
yeah.
So I always want to end these podcasts on a positive note. Um, what's been your biggest success thus far?
Mm. Really great question. Last year, I made nearly a million renminbi for a company through live streaming and social media. And so let's say £100,000
Yeah,
in a matter of a few months. So that was quite a nice case study to have.
sure.
Um, and that was a combination of live streaming, online work,
Mm,
some offline work as well, because China's just blowing up with expos and
mm,
events right now. So that was somewhat of a success. And not just on a sales perspective, but to see the consumers, especially the offline event, and seeing how interested they were in this particular product that
yeah,
I was working with. So that would be the biggest success. I think the other success would be I'm really doing what I want now.
right.
Whereas the first few years I was kind of finding my
Finding your way.
feet, yeah, finding my way and looking at others thinking I want to do that, but not really doing it. And then my mindset now, I'm one of those people that's doing stuff where I'm getting asked, oh, I want to do social media, I want to do live streaming. So I think that's been a big success. And I've got a client now that we have a good relationship. I think that's quite key. Having and someone that I know I can rely on. Like he's never gonna not pay me on a certain month or he it's good having that kind of client that you can rely on as well, and you have a good relationship with. So that's been another success.
What is generally your feeling about brands, companies coming into China in 2024?
Well, the biggest issue I have right now is slow decision making. I think the in China, this is what China makes you. It makes you quicker. We say China speed, right? It
Yes.
makes you a lot quicker. When you're using WeChat, you get back to people straight away. And that can be quite, I think that's something that companies need to kind of up their game when they come to China. They can't be spending weeks and weeks to make a decision, because the Chinese competitors
This
have
was
made
my
that
biggest
decision.
culture shock, Daniel, when I moved to Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and they want to make the money, but they want to spend weeks or months making a decision
Yeah,
whether they want to go. It's like just you got to just kind of go all in.
yeah,
I'm fine. I appreciate and understand the economy. Is going through some
difficulty
um, difficulties. That's the word. In the UK, in Europe, in the US.
everywhere.
But this is the time you can't. In Chinese, we say bailan, which is like to start to slow down and just be lazy. It's like you can't do that. Like you've got to. This is the time to
To
really
go.
think, okay, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah,
So I think that there's still, if let's say it's a brand and they're selling a product here in China, really what they should be focusing on is localizing in the Chinese market and not just coming in with their own country's mindset.
mm,
I guess a lot with British companies, they come in, they want to do it their way. And it's like, no,
right,
you've got to localize and assimilate with the Chinese community because then they're
right.
more likely to buy your products. I think there's some great opportunities, in my realm with live streaming. I mean, Douyin has just lowered its
Yeah,
from 100,000 RMB to 50,000 RMB to like set up a shop there,
right.
which is a big game changer. Little Red is really, really growing right now with their live streaming capabilities. On the outbound side, I'm
Mm.
seeing a lot of Chinese companies migrating out
Abroad.
to the US,
Yeah,
Europe, UK,
yeah.
social media, setting up offline presence. So I think that's something else to,
Watch
more
out for.
partnerships,
Yeah,
yeah, to look out for. And the Chinese are really looking for great distributors and trusted partners on the ground. So that didn't really happen as much, I'd say, before COVID, but now that's been an offshoot of the Chinese economy slowing. Is now Chinese companies are recognizing we need to go out.
yeah.
So I think that's something else just to bear in mind. But the Chinese economy, whatever I personally, whatever there's all these experts are saying on LinkedIn, oh, the Chinese economy is bad, and I live here on the ground, and people are buying. Well, Chinese New Year's just happened, and people were spending money like crazy.
Mm,
So utilize that market and work with
yeah,
trusted partners that know their stuff.
right. I love you talking about China speed. I will, however, contradict that and say that my motto for 2024 is slow and steady.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know if Europe has caught up with me or what, but uh, it is. I will say, we're in a climate now. It's not easy for people to make decisions, and I
Mm.
know that there is the China speed, um, but I empathize with those that are just worried. Like I'm like you, Daniel. I see the opportunities, right? I'm
Mm.
in the China business on a day-to-day basis. I was just at a conference in Edinburgh with people that are sitting in Edinburgh and they don't see the China business day to day.
Mm.
They see it at a big gala, once every year, and then they feel the momentum, they feel the energy, they feel the vibe, and they're like, "Yeah, we got to go." And then they go back to their office and they're like, "Should we go? I don't know." And I think there's still a lot of hesitation about flying over and
Mm.
going over and traveling over there. So, but yeah, China's,
I think that's a good point to end on is, the UK in particular. There's a lot of countries opening up. China's got opening up visa,
yeah,
2 week visa free.
yeah,
Ireland's just about to be, I think, officially they've
in that,
announced it, but
yeah,
hasn't happened. I have a sneaky suspicion that they will open up the UK this year.
Well, they should.
from what I'm seeing, with the reports here in China.
I mean, they should. If they
And then if
don't,
the US,
that would be a very political issue there if they
yeah.
didn't, right?
So yeah, and if I could see them opening up to the US, 2-week visa free, it could happen. So that's just
I
something to
have
keep.
with a German passport 15 days.
All right. Yeah. Wow. Lucky you. So but yeah, I think China is still thriving. Like, don't I'm not indoctrinated when I say this. I've lived here for nearly 10 years. I've gone through the ups and downs, lockdowns, making money, building revenue for companies. Now it is a great, you should seriously still be considering China because it's a mature market, right? It would have been great if you'd come in 5 years ago, but the sooner the better, I always say.
Yeah. So let's finish off today's podcast on the question I ask everybody, which is, so you arrived in Hong Kong, so a little bit different from some people who arrived in mainland China. But on the first day that you landed as a student in Hong Kong, what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Get out straight away. So get on the street straight away. I
Don't hold yourself up in the dorm room.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what some people did at university. They just the first week kind of just played it safe. I got on one of those mini buses in Hong Kong. I had no idea where I was going. I just went.
Right.
There's the mini buses. So and just the first thing I did was just started speaking to people, random people, on the street. I must have looked like a madman, but and it's really paved the way for my business nowadays because I've always been someone that can open up opportunities. I've always been someone that can, my staff say something, how can you just create business from thin air? And it's like, because I open opportunities. So I think that's not to play it safe when you come here. So I threw myself in the deep end of going to those local areas in Hong Kong. When I went to mainland China, I didn't just go to foreigner areas. I really just wanted to immerse myself and learn as much as possible. So that would be my best advice.
During COVID, I had this phrase where I said, there's the group of people who are in this phase of analysis paralysis. They're analyzing so much that it paralyzes them to not take action. And then there are those like yourself who just dive right into the deep end, and they're, it's kind of like you're winging it, right? And seeing where it takes you. Both are, I mean, I think you need a mix of both, right? To be able to succeed, you always need to take caution and take steps and mitigate risk and all of that. But if you dive in the deep end without a plan, you're stuck. If you are completely paralyzed, you're stuck. You kind of have to have this mixture of both. And this is where you're right in saying, work with partners on the ground that can support you and give you that added value to take you out of the paralysis, or at least give you that strategy plan, right? And succeed. So Daniel, I want to thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. And let's plug this podcast episode away.
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, LinkedIn or the
I'll
usual
be providing all your details.
But yeah, I mean, my best advice for this podcast, if you're watching this now, is just plug the hell out of it, guys. Share it, like it, write a comment. And the other way I always plug stuff is everyone that I'm going to speak to from now until eternity is like, have you checked out this podcast? Go and check it out.
Yeah.
Even have it on in the background. Like, when you're at work or whatever, that's honestly the best way to grow something. So,
and to learn something. It's all about education, right? I always say knowledge is power. The more you listen to people, the more you're going to learn about what to do that fits you.
Yeah, so I really support what you're doing. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and we need more people like you on this planet. So
thank you, Daniel. Well, I think we both relate with each other. I never thought of myself as a bridge, but I think there are rare and few of us on the ground that are this bridge, right, to companies. So let's keep at it. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast and or the YouTube channel, please share it with others. post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Now, can Woodburn help you? I am offering a free 30-minute call where we discuss the obstacles you are encountering on your China business journey and how perhaps we can help accelerate your success. The link to my diary is in the show notes. I look forward to speaking with you.